Do you know what's gonna be meta in Dragonflight? Are you planning it?
Is it gonna be? Is it gonna be? No, no, it's not going to be.
No, we know. He means we know what's gonna be meta as DPS in Dragonflight, because there's a lot of discussion to be had around this subject, and I wanna make sure we get the right examples up in the air.
And do you know why this topic matters? All right. We've been having and hearing talks in our stream and in our YouTube comments, and of course our Discord as well, about what is going to be good with all of the people playing pre-patch right now, because the hype for Dragonflight is real. And although we have mentioned it, and we're not the only ones that are saying this, pre-patch is not indicative of what the numbers will be in Dragonflight. People still seem to kind of take this as a reference, like, man, I'm seeing Havoc doing so much damage, that means it's gonna be good in Dragonflight, right?
Yeah.
Well,
it's the biggest mistake you can make if you want to be part of the meta cycle, making this decision based on what you see on the pre-patch. The pre-patch traditionally in all expansions was a big old circus which did not reflect anything.
That's such a good reference, man.
Yeah, it did not reflect anything to come in the proper max level tier set, all of the power you can have expansion, okay? So let's just get that out the way, because I know Flame is having a lot of questions on this subject on the stream. We're getting a lot of the questions in the comments on YouTube videos, and I get why people want to play meta specs. I understand that. It's fine.
I like playing meta sometimes too.
Hey man, it's a nice feeling to be on top of those DPS charts, no doubt, and we understand it and we vibe with it. At the same time, we understand and embrace the different aspect. Play what you love. If you master the spec that you love, you'll do well, as opposed to somebody that is always looking for that next flavor of the month and not really getting, you know, to master it and in depth with it. That's a different subject, but we'll get to it. What is meta in Dragonflight as DPS? The true answer to this is, you might think, okay, you can have like a giga speculation argument for the specs that have really good talents. Now, we can talk about warriors, we can talk about shamans, we can talk about rogues. Yeah, sure.
We can even talk about ferals, where one week in beta, they were like out DPSing everybody and their mom, and then they got nerfed, and now they're like average, right?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Boomkins as well. You see Boomkins doing giga damage, Affliction Warlocks doing giga damage in pre-patch. You can make very much speculative or have speculative ideas on this, and I guess one good starting point would be, okay, how are the talents looking for a couple of classes? Really great. Does that mean they're gonna become meta? That's not a guarantee. There's this, and I kind of started to hate this word, but it has to be used so much in every context, tuning. And to be fair, tuning has not been the greatest that Blizzard was ever at, okay? Blizzard can do great graphics, great cinematics, you know, great themes, maybe some nice story, hopefully.
Sometimes great expansions.
But when it comes to tuning, it's always a giga challenge for them. And when we're talking about meta DPS and Dragonflight, tuning has to become part of this conversation.
Yeah, and I get a lot of people's concern about this, because you do have outliers like Survival Hunter and Destroy Warlock that we had in 9.2, where they were like significantly overpowering all the other specs in the game, and those usually are very rare. Not to mention, those remained that much overpowered because of the system of Shadowlands, where you had a class with your basic spells, then you had talents, then you had conduits, then you had legendaries, then you have covenants, then you had tier sets. So there's all these layers of power that kind of work on top of each other, instead of like all just being one thing, while we have talents right now in Dragonflight and in the pre-patch. So it was particularly difficult to essentially balance, even if, let's say, they wanted to nerf Destroy Warlocks in Survival. It was very hard for them to nerf and not completely got the specs, because of how difficult it is to manage all these, let's say, juggling all these systems around. Yeah. And they probably decided, like, all right, let's just leave it. It's the last patch of the game. Let's just let people have fun. And that's probably what I would imagine was the majority of the mindset of the devs, considering that they would probably want to focus on Dragonflight. And to counter-argument that, we probably have a little bit of more insight into the balance of specs, since we've been doing guides for like years. And let me tell you, as opposed to BFA, at least at the bell curve where like 99% of the players are, the specs have never been so balanced that I was able to see. Sure, at the extremes you have super ridiculous stuff like Destroy Warlock and Survival Hunter, but that's like very tiny, and to top it all off, the content, at least in Shadowlands, because this is the best reference that we have, because we can only imagine that they're going to play like this in Dragonflight, the content was tuned in such a way that the majority, the bulk of the average specs could clear it in pretty good time. And if you did have an overpowered spec, then you would just like blast through it. But you don't need that if you want to clear content competitively.
Yeah. So just forcing it through once again, when it comes to tuning and how Blizzard decide to do this for Dragonflight, you can obviously see if you're at least, semi-aware of what's happening with, the forum posts and the news. There's tuning going on as we speak. We like recently had changes to Discipline Priest. We had changes to Guardian. They made it shit. That's a different discussion. We had a video on how shit Guardian Druid is. The point being is that they're constantly doing it. And by the way, do not make a decision for what's going to be meta in Dragonflight. Because if you remember, in Shadowlands, they have changed, not changed specs, well, they have buffed and nerfed like multiple specs 1 week before the raid opened up. So you can have a spec that is considered to be meta up until the last minute and then be completely changed. This is why this whole subject of, okay, I'm gonna play what's meta in Dragonflight. That's cool, man. Good, more power to you. We're just saying, do not make a decision now. I think now it's the best time to just play with the talents, try different specs, see what you like. It's more important to like feel involved with a spec's rotation, its fantasy, its mechanics, its builds. Experiment with that. Maybe test out some on the beta. Maybe look at some of our videos. We have a lot of videos on all the specs and shit. You can do that as well.
And speaking of testing, just to close it off with the tuning bit as well, Marcelian mentioned this a bunch of times during the years, is that the way that the devs kind of work with their internal builds is that they're about like a couple of weeks or a month ahead of what we are able to physically test. So let's say you play Feral right now and Feral does no damage whatsoever, and the devs are like, all right, we're gonna have to buff Feral, but we won't know about that buff until like weeks and weeks after we've reported it and after we basically concluded that Feral has little damage. And that kind of cycles into like, oh, the raid, the season 1 is about to start. Oh, we just got Feral buffs because the devs already knew that Feral was about to get buffed. Yeah. So that's kind of why the time frame changes the skew. So it's kind of hard. The only real way that we can tell what the meta is about a week or two in the season time frame.
Yeah, and even that will change. And adding to your point, I think the best example of that is with the post about Discipline Priest, the most recent one, where they said this is not going to come in the next beta build, it's going to come in multiple builds. Okay, so this means that these changes to this priest have happened in their internal builds, like in different phases, right? If they were added, because they work on builds, okay, this is beta build V20, okay, and this is already in testing internally by them 2, 3, 4, maybe a month earlier than what we could expect when they come out. That's the perfect example. They're saying it, okay, these changes will not come in the next one. It will be progressively through the other builds.
That's actually a good point, because that exact same thing happened with Prot Warrior. If you guys remember, a couple of weeks or about a month or two ago, Prot Warrior was like this mega DPS OP tank. Everybody was gonna switch to Prot Warrior, and then they've announced that they're gonna nerf Prot Warrior subsequently in subsequent weeks over the next month, and they did. And now, even though Prot Warrior is a good tank, is very much in line with stuff like Vengeance Demon Hunter or Blood Decay, right? Which was something that was so not in everybody's frame of mind a month or two when the Prot Warrior was like, okay, this is meta, this is gonna be it. Everybody play Prot Warrior in Dragonflight.
Yeah, exactly. So, coming back to the subject at hand here, what's more important for you? Is it more important for you to be at the top of the DPS meters and playing what is actually to be considered meta? Because there's always going to be a ranking. There's always going to be a top performing spec in a specific fight, or a top performance spec in a, let's say, majority of the fights. The fights will have maybe some will have a lot of movement, some will have a lot of mechanics, some will have a lot of cleave, AoE, some will be super single target. This is another argument that makes it hard to define what is meta. But if you want to be that person, more power to you, man. It's fine. If you get like the biggest enjoyment on performing the very best and being at the top of your game and being at the top of the DPS charts, that's cool. If you want to enjoy to the fullest a spec, to enjoy all of its inner workings or min-max it, even though it's not meta, I can promise you that instead of trying to learn everything that is becoming, at the top of the food chain, super flavor of the month, as opposed to being that dude who always has to learn the new spec and in most cases does not perform as it would expect. Is this another thing? The perception is when you see the top guilds, the top streamers or whatever being on top of the DPS charts, you think, oh my god, I'm gonna play this, I'm gonna do the same. It's very, very different. I would say it's way better to like take a spec you love, you find interesting, and study that and play with that and practice that, and you will do better. I think Flame made an example with the rogues. You can talk about that.
Yeah, but basically that's the thing, right? With the exceptions of outliers like District Warlock and Survival Hunter, which happen like once in a blue moon.
Yeah.
Usually the specs are not that far apart. Where if let's say Outlaw becomes like a OP meta spec, but you're an assassination main, chances are that the difference between Outlaw and Assassination are not gonna be that big enough where you, as a perfect Assassination player, will not do at least competitive damage with an average Outlaw that just picked Outlaw because it was just flavor of the month. So going into the specs, it takes a long time to actually master and do well. And we have countless examples of this, even from theory crafters that we constantly do podcasts with, playing like, I'm thinking of Forever Guy that stuck to his guns and played Outlaw in Shadowlands whenever, Assassination and Sub were kings. And he was destroying the meters, man. Like outpacing meta specs or people who just switched because the Fire Mage is gonna be good.
We can give our own examples as well. I mean, back when Survival Hunter was like pretty shit, in 9.1.5 or something like that, Flame was still topping the DPS meters, at least in some specific fights where nobody would expect. Nobody was like, oh my god, man, why you play Survival? Same argument when let's say in dungeons, when I played my Red and we had to pug a Destro Lock or a Survival, there were a lot of instances where I would out-DPS those guys because I loved the specs. I loved past
oh man,
specs so much.
Past hurt so much, man. Shit.
I loved it so much and I studied it to the bone, and it was clear that these guys, like you would see when we would go for like bugging, you would see like a million different Survival Hunters in Season 4, a million different Destro Locks. We would pick them, right? They had high IO. They used to see them clearing 20s or whatever. Let's get them in. And at the end of the dungeon, lo and behold, the underdogs or the guys who like actually got involved with their specs out DPS them. So not to make like not to make like a super braggadocious situation here. It's just underlying the point that whenever you find the fun and enjoyment and involvement with a spec, I think generally you'll do better than just picking something that always will be meta.
And just to kind of round all of it up, this has been, people like to play meta spec, and that's fine, go for it.
Yeah,
and
man.
Sometimes the meta or the OPness does a lot of heavy lifting for somebody. For somebody who's just going into the spec, I'm thinking, this Rolex is survivals, and you can kind of see that when the content gets more and more challenging, where their lack of expertise is shown. And we've had this over the years, probably starting with Legion, where we've had these external system powers that have been like crutches for players, because you didn't really need to learn the spec. You could just get that Biz Legendary that did a lot of work for you, or pick that Covenant that just blasted. And sure, we have exceptions where, it's a little bit harder, it takes a little bit of practice to master it, but sometimes the external power system just did a lot of heavy lifting for you, which is not as much the case in Dragonfly. First of all, we don't have any of that anymore, and you could argue that talents could do that, but it's not really that much. As far as I know, so far, looking at all the specs, there's not like one talent that just does 20% of your damage, regardless of what you do during your rotation, right? So you kind of have to learn and practice it a little bit. So if you want to play meta, play meta.
Yep.
If you don't, if you just want to have fun, whatever you do, pick a class that you enjoy, have fun, and then try to master and be better at it if damage and performance is something that you're interested in.
Yeah, totally agree. And if you like 100% want to know what is going to be meta in Dragonflight, I think the best answer will lie maybe 2-3 weeks after the raid and the season starts. Then you will know for sure. Then we will also start doing like our regular TLFs where we talk about, the logs and data from, the Warcraft logs, sub creation, all of that. And we can have a clearer representation on, the highest level of how people perform. Then we can have maybe a clearer idea. But so far, so good. It's the time to test out a lot of the stuff, fall in love with specific specs, fall in love with specific talents, talent builds or whatever, and just make a decision off of that. Because truly, nobody knows maybe apart from Blizzard, I don't think even Blizzard knows what's gonna be meta in Dragonflight in Season 1. But that being said, hope this was helpful. I hope this kind of cleared the air for a lot of folks who are coming on the stream or throwing in comments about, oh, what's gonna be meta? What do you think is gonna blast in Dragonflight? Yeah, hope this cleared it a bit.
Yeah, no, we will see more about this as we go on. But thank you for watching the video, and thank you, dear patrons, for supporting the content and making all of this possible.
Hell yeah.
If you want to support us a little bit more and you like seeing these types of videos on a daily basis, it does help a lot. If you check the Patreon link down below, check our Patreon page, see exactly what tiers you have and things like that, and maybe there's something for you. You never know.
Yeah, thank you guys. See you very, very soon. Bye!
I've been loving it then, I still love it now. Still, I play WoW. Still, I play WoW. Getting better every day, let me show you how. Cause still, I play WoW. Still, I play WoW. It's getting harder to stay, but at the end of the day, it's a guilty pleasure, so just log in and play. Whether it's classic or retail, I'ma do a /bow. Still, I play WoW.